The ASUS TUF Gaming A15 laptop is a popular new entry among Malaysians and folks around the region, and you guys were asking for a review when we were unboxing this laptop, so here it is.
Our model is the second highest variant with an AMD Ryzen 7 4800H CPU and an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2060 non-Max-Q. It has 16GB of RAM and 1TB of NVMe SSD for storage. Let's quickly go through its design. It has a refreshed look compared to last year's TUF Gaming FX505. The cover here looks cleaner with the TUF logo with wings. It also has 4 screws on each corner that aren't really screws. But like before, this is plastic, however it feels smoother to the touch and isn't a fingerprint magnet. It has honeycomb vents now at the back and at the bottom. The keyboard layout looks similar as well, which is a good thing because the keys are easily discernible and well, they light up in RGB. The palm rest has a brushed metal finish just like before. The display here is a Full HD IPS LCD panel that pushes an impressive 144Hz refresh rate and has support for adaptive sync. The only downside is that it's kind of dim and the colors are a little washed out, but it never really bothered me too much when I was gaming. It only bothered me a little when I was watching movies. But at least the bottom firing speakers are good, some of the best I've heard in a gaming laptop in a while. There's surprisingly a good amount of depth and decent bass. The highs are also crisp. For me, watching Netflix on this sounds really good. But you know what else sounds good? A 40% discount on your food delivery. Thanks to Vivo Malaysia, our sponsor for today, new Foodpanda users can get 40% off their first order. Just enter the code PANDAV19 upon checkout to have a proper meal on the cheap. But be quick though, because the promo ends this June 30th.
As sleek as it looks, this is one chunky boy. With its charging brick, it's gonna weigh a total of about 3 kilograms, so it's gonna be hell trying to lug this around. I wouldn't recommend this laptop for anyone who's traveling very often.
When it comes to I/O ports, it has a decent array of options for a value gaming laptop. You have 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A ports, 1 USB 2.0 Type A port, and 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C with DisplayPort 1.4 support. There's also an Ethernet port and a headphone jack. Perhaps there could be more ports on the right side of the laptop, but what you get should be sufficient. Next, let's talk about storage. This laptop has an Intel 660p 1TB NVMe M.2 SSD, and upgradability on this laptop is impressive as it has one extra NVMe M.2 slot and a 2.5-inch bay for a hard drive. You have plenty of options there for added storage down the line. The benchmark scores for the Intel 660p SSD is decent, but do remember that it's not a premium SSD. But you know, in terms of real-world usage, everything booted up for me really quickly with no problems. For memory, this laptop comes with two 8GB DDR4 3200MHz Samsung memory sticks, and you can have a maximum capacity of 32 gigs. Let's finally get into performance. As mentioned before, this runs on an AMD Ryzen 7 4800H CPU with an RTX 2060 non-Max-Q graphics card. You can change the power settings in Armoury Crate, and we ran our test on turbo mode. We first ran Shadow of the Tomb Raider on 1080p with the highest graphics preset, DLSS on, with ray traced shadows off. We scored an average of 78 frames per second, and then again with ray traced shadow at Ultra, and we got 55 frames per second on average. Final Fantasy XV is next in line, and despite its age, it can still give this system a run for its money, with everything turned up high at 1080p, but with DLSS plus Nvidia settings off, we scored high on the benchmark tool. But with DLSS on, the benchmark had to run at 4K. We also enabled all the Nvidia settings and got the slightly low score. This is of course pushing it, so I recommend you stick to 1080p with DLSS off, and you should get above 60 frames per second on average. Next in line is Battlefield 5 with the single-player campaign mission in Norway. With everything set to Ultra at 1080p again, the laptop managed around 80 frames per second. With ray tracing and DLSS on, we got around 65 frames per second, which is definitely decent. The last game on our list is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. On high, it runs at 70 frames per second with occasional dips into 60s, while on Ultra, you get 60 frames per second with dips into 50s. In open areas is where the frames suffer a little, but indoor maps fare better. Next up are synthetic benchmarks, and we started with TimeSpy on 3D Mark and got a decent score of 6381. Then we tested the Ryzen 7 4800H's rendering prowess with Blender. The BMW scene was rendered in 3.5 minutes or 209 seconds, while the classroom scene took about 10 minutes and 38 seconds or 602 seconds. decent scores overall. Now let's talk thermals. The laptop does get warm after about an hour of gaming, but it never really got uncomfortable. But what was uncomfortable is the side exhaust fan that would constantly blow hot air right at your hand. That's very annoying. And if you're on turbo mode, like we are, the fans get obnoxiously loud. So these are really important things that you need to keep in mind. Lastly, we move on to battery life. With a 48 watt-hour battery, it's not great. I got about 3 hours of battery life while using it for work and browsing the web. It's another one of those areas that had to be sacrificed to keep this laptop affordable. With that said, it's a gaming laptop and you're expected to be hooked up to the beefy 230 watt charging brick that comes with it for most of the time.
But all its flaws are really just small prices to pay for such an impressive value laptop that's all about performance. It's a gaming first laptop that can also handle a bit of creative work as well. For 5,699 ringgit, this laptop will future-proof you for at least another 3 to 5 years. On top of that, there's plenty of room for storage upgrades down the line. The only problem is the side air vents that's constantly blowing hot air on your hand, like I mentioned earlier. So do keep that in mind. Try out the laptop if you can and see if that bothers you or not. It's also a heavy laptop, so it's really recommended for people who want to hunker down at home and just play video games for hours, or people who occasionally go out for LAN parties and stuff like that. But for people who are constantly on the go, maybe you join tournaments very frequently or something like that, then this laptop may be a bit too heavy to carry around. I would recommend something lighter. But if you're willing to forego those flaws, definitely a worth buy. I would give it a thumbs up. Let us know down in the comments below, would you go for the ASUS TUF Gaming A15? Would you go for this variant or a different one? Or maybe a totally different brand? Alright, remember to give us a like, subscribe. This is Victor signing off. Bye-bye.